Hello again. On to the last lesson for Chapter 4. It is 4.5, Aquatic Ecosystems. And our goal is to explain the general distribution of life in aquatic systems as a function of chemistry, geography, light, depth, salinity, and temperature. Neat little far side. Well, somehow they knew we were, whoa, our dorsal fins are sticking out. I wonder how many times that screwed things up. Enjoy. So our objectives are to discuss the factors that affect aquatic systems, identify the major categories of freshwater ecosystems, describe the importance of estuaries, and describe and compare the distinct ocean zones that make up marine ecosystems. Think about it. We call our planet Earth, yet nearly 3/4 of the Earth's surface is covered with water. Despite the vital roles aquatic ecosystems play in the biosphere, many of these ecosystems are only partly understood. So what is life like underwater? Let's take a look. Our first objective is to discuss the factors that affect aquatic ecosystems. What was that? Nothing. Okay. Water depth strongly influences aquatic life because sunlight penetrates only a relatively short distance through the water. The sunlight region near the surface in which photosynthesis can occur is known as the photic zone. Makes sense. Photic meaning light. The photic zone may be as deep as 200 meters in tropical seas, but just a few meters deep or less in rivers and swamps. Think about why that might be. Photosynthetic algae called phytoplankton live in the photic zone. Zooplankton, the tiny free-floating little animals, eat the phytoplankton, and this is the first step in many aquatic food webs. Below the photic zone is the dark aphotic zone, prefix A meaning not light, where photosynthesis cannot occur. So many aquatic organisms live on or in rocks and sediments on the bottoms of lakes, streams, and oceans. These organisms are called the benthos, and their habitat is the benthic zone. When the water is shallow enough for the benthic zone to be within the photic zone, algae and rooted aquatic plants can grow. When the benthic zone is below the photic zone, chemosynthetic autotrophs are the only primary producers you're going to find. Aquatic habitats are warmer near the equator and colder near the poles. Common sense. Temperature in aquatic habitats also often varies with depth. The deepest parts of lakes and oceans are colder than the surface waters. Again, common sense. Currents in lakes and oceans can dramatically affect water temperature because they can carry water that is significantly warmer or cooler than would be typical for any given latitude, depth, or distance from shore. Organisms need certain substances to live, such as oxygen, nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. The type of availability of these dissolved substances vary within and between bodies of water, greatly affecting the types of organisms that can survive there. So let's look at Objective 1 again, was to discuss the factors that affect aquatic ecosystems. Aquatic ecosystems are affected primarily by the water's depth, temperature, flow, and amount of dissolved nutrients. Objective 2. Identify the major categories of freshwater ecosystems. All right, let's start where it all starts at then. Freshwater ecosystems, first of all, include lakes, streams, freshwater wetlands, like include bogs, swamps, and marshes. So often a chain of streams, lakes, and rivers begins in the interior of a continent and then flows through several biomes then to the sea. Rivers, streams, creeks, and brooks often originate from underground water sources in mountains or hills. Near a source, water has plenty of dissolved oxygen, but little plant life. Downstream, sediments build up and plants establish themselves. Farther downstream, water may meander slowly through at flat areas. Animals in many rivers and streams depend on terrestrial plants and animals that live along their banks for food. Beautiful water there. I like to go whitewater rafting there. Or not. The food in webs and lakes and ponds are often based on a combination of plankton and attached algae and plants. Plankton, again, is a general term that includes both phytoplankton and zooplankton. Water flows in and out of lakes and ponds and circulates between the surface of the benthos, distributing heat and oxygen and nutrients. A wetland is an ecosystem in which water covers the soil or is present at or near the surface for at least part of the year. Water may flow through the freshwater wetlands or it may stay stagnant in place. Wetlands are often very high in nutrients, highly productive, and serve as breeding grounds for many organisms. Freshwater wetlands purify water by filtering pollutants and help to prevent flooding by absorbing large amounts of water and then slowly releasing it. The main types of freshwater wetlands are freshwater bogs, freshwater marshes, and freshwater swamps. Saltwater wetlands are called estuaries. So our objective 2 was to identify the major categories of freshwater ecosystems. So you should know that freshwater ecosystems can be divided into 3 main categories: your rivers and streams, your lakes and ponds, and freshwater wetlands. Objective 3, describe the importance of estuaries. So an estuary is a special kind of wetland, like we mentioned before, formed where a river meets the sea. Estuaries contain a mixture of freshwater and saltwater and are affected by the rise and fall of the ocean tides. Many are shallow, which means that enough sunlight reaches the benthos to power photosynthesis. Estuaries serve as spawning and nursery grounds for many ecologically and commercially important fish and shellfish species, including the bluefish, striped bass, shrimp, and crabs. Here's some more estuaries. Salt marshes, I should go back, hold on. Salt marshes are temperate estuaries that have salt-tolerant grasses above the low tide zone and seagrasses below the water. One of the largest salt marshes in America surrounds the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. Mangrove swamps are tropical estuaries that have several species of salt-tolerant trees, collectively called mangroves. The largest mangrove area in America is right here in Florida Everglades National Park. So our objective 3 was to describe the importance of estuaries. Estuaries serve as spawning and nursery grounds for many ecologically and commercially important fish and shellfish species, including the bluefish, striped bass, shrimps, and crabs. Objective 4 is to describe and compare the distinct ocean zones that make up marine ecosystems. So ecologists typically divide the ocean into zones based on the depth and distance from shore. Starting with the shallowest and closest to land, marine ecosystems include the intertidal zone, the coastal zone, and the open zone. This diagram shows the different zones in the oceans. We'll go through each one at a time. So organisms in the intertidal zone, where you can see where it's located right there, are submerged in seawater at high tide and then exposed to air and sunlight at low tide. These organisms are subject to regular and extreme changes in temperature and are often battered, as you can imagine, by waves and currents. A typical rocky intertidal community exists in temperate regions where exposed rocks line the shore. There, barnacles and seaweed permanently attach themselves to the rocks. The coastal zone extends from the low tide mark to the outer edge of the continental shelf, the relatively shallow border that surrounds the continents. Water in the coastal zone is brilliantly lit and often supplied with nutrients by freshwater runoff from land. And as a result, coastal oceans tend to be highly productive. Kelp forests and coral reefs are 2 important coastal communities. The open ocean begins at the edge of the continental shelf and extends outward. And more than 90% of the world's ocean area is considered open ocean. Depth ranges from 500 meters along the continental slopes to more than 10,000 meters in open trenches. The open ocean is divided into 2 zones based on light penetration, the photic and the aphotic zones. The open ocean typically has low nutrient levels and only supports small species of phytoplankton. Still, because of its enormous area, most photosynthesis on Earth occurs in the sunlit top 100 meters of the open ocean. The permanently dark aphotic zone includes the deepest parts of the ocean. Food webs in the aphotic zone are based either on organisms that fall from the photic zone above, dying and floating down, or on chemosynthetic organisms. Deep ocean organisms like hatchetfish are exposed to high pressure, frigid temperatures, and total darkness. Benthic environments in the deep sea were once thought to be nearly devoid, absence of life, but are now known to have islands of high productivity. Deep sea vents, where superheated water boils out of cracks on the ocean floor, support chemosynthetic primary producers. So our objective 4 was to describe and compare the distinct ocean zones that make up marine ecosystems. Ecologists typically divide the ocean into zones based on depth and distance from the shore: intertidal, coastal, open ocean photic, and aphotic zones. So now ask yourself, can you discuss the factors that affect aquatic ecosystems? Identify the major categories of freshwater ecosystems? Describe the importance of estuaries? And also describe and compare the distinct ocean zones that make up marine ecosystems? I hope so. And while I turn off my computer, there's a scary squirrel.